Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar once again raised the issue of India's membership to the United Nations Security Council. He says former PM Jawaharlal Nehru prioritized China over India in membership to the UNSC. Now, the UNSC is the world's most exclusive club. It hosts the 5 permanent members. They are the victors of the Second World War. This club has largely stayed in this form for nearly 80 years. That is since 1945. It's only had 2 membership changes since then. The first in 1971, when the People's Republic of China replaced Taiwan. The second change was in 1991, when the Russian Federation replaced the former Soviet Union. But does the composition of the UNSC reflect the current geopolitical state of play? The world's most populous democracy and the world's 4th largest economy is a notable exception. And joining me to discuss this conundrum are Ambassador T.S. Tirumurthy and my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul. Ambassador Tirumurthy, welcome to the News9 Plus show. I will start by asking you this: why is China keen on blocking India's passage into the UNSC? 4 out of 5 UNSC members want us in, China wants us out.
No, I think, China and India have been rivals, and we continue to be rivals. And from a position of engagement, you have seen what has happened in the last 3-4 years. So therefore, it's not going to be an easy relationship with China in the foreseeable future. And but more than that, I think China also sees India as something which is very different from its own. Here is an equally big country, and we are becoming a very successful country. We are becoming a major power economically and otherwise, and militarily as well. But at the same time, unlike China, we are also a democracy. Yeah. We are a pluralistic country. We have human rights. We have a whole lot of other things going for us. We have freedoms, which, so I think when you look at it, here is a very successful country, a neighbor of China, as big as China, if not more. And then at the same time, we are having a different polity, a different ethos and a set of values. And I think that is for China, which is more irksome than, anything else. And that's why I think, apart from the rivalry which we have had, and we have had the recent clashes over the last decade, but this is also an important consideration for China. That's the way I look at it. Right,
absolutely. And Aditya, what's your take on this? As Ambassador Tirumurthy mentioned, the fact that China's rivalry is keeping us out of the P5, the most exclusive club in the world. As long as you have standoffs with them on the border, do you see this ever happening, an Indian seat at the UNSC, or will there be extraneous factors, pressures of the G4, for instance, the 4 countries who want to get in, which will actually open the doors?
Firstly, there are 2 or 3 things that we need to keep in mind. At this juncture in history, it's very much clear that if there's one country across the globe that actually belongs to the P5 or the P6, if at all there's a reform, it is India. Right. And I don't say it as an Indian, I don't say it as a journalist, I say it factually. I say it because India is the largest contributor in the United Nations every way possible. From not just the soft power yoga day, but contributing in every way possible, from even at the UN security level, giving the highest number of soldiers out there across the conflict-ridden regions. Right. But another fact that needs to be largely discussed is the failure of the United Nations to bring in any kind of a conflict resolution. Right. 2 of the recent examples are the Russia-Ukraine war and the situation in Gaza. Right. The UN Secretary General keeps on speaking about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but why has the UN failed to bring in any kind of consensus, any kind of peace? Why do countries like India have to step in at the G20 to bring in some kind of a consensus? Right. That means G20, G4 and other such multilateral forums hold much more mechanism and much more power to in fact bring in some kind of a conflict resolution rather than UN.
Ambassador Tirumurthy, a valid point there. The fact that the toothlessness of the United Nations has been debated ad nauseum, the fact that it's failed to prevent 2 of the biggest conflicts. While this is still the case, then why, the dichotomy, why does India want to enter a body which is so completely toothless, incapable of preventing conflict of the kind that we are seeing in Russia, Ukraine and Israel and the Hamas in Gaza?
No, I just, if you permit, I just have one small point to make on the earlier question.
Yes.
See, there is no P6
Right.
Because this is not just about India. The expansion of the Security Council goes beyond India.
Right.
I think what EM is saying and is absolutely correct is that whenever it is expanded, we'll be there.
Yes.
But it is not just about India. It goes to
Right.
Africa, which is no representation, Latin America, and a whole lot of other
Yes.
things. So I think here we have every aspirant, so to say,
Yes.
including India, being stopped by some country or the other.
Right.
You know, we may have China as a rival, but we also have, other countries like Brazil has Mexico, and you have Germany being stopped by Russia and others. You have Japan, which is, of course, China. So I think this is something we need to keep in mind, that whenever the expansion is slightly larger than just about India.
Right.
And as far as the United Nations is concerned, yes, absolutely, they have been, they have failed on many fronts. And the Security Council, see, I don't want to get into the United Nations. That's slightly
Yes.
larger than the Security Council.
Right.
So I presume your question is really about the Security Council.
Yes.
And but let us also not forget that more than 100 small countries, they can be small island states or others,
Yes.
they need the United Nations to have a voice.
Right.
They need a world forum.
Yes.
And in these plurilateral and small forums and all that, they are not there. Where are all these small countries in G20? They are not
Yes.
there.
Right.
So I think we have to be a little bit more mindful when we talk about this,
Yes.
because small groupings are good for big countries. And the second is international law is done only in the Security Council.
Yes.
Very rarely is it done outside, whether it's UNCLOS or the UNFCCC, climate change, or law of sea. So I think this is important for us to keep in mind. Even the sustainable development goals, for example,
Yes.
came to the UN to be done.
Right.
And it was, in fact, countries like India and Brazil insisted it comes to the UN and should not be decided outside,
Right.
like the MDGs.
Right.
And finally, to say that, let us not forget that even in Gaza and all that, the examples which you are giving, the point is that ultimately when there is going to be a resolution, you have to fall back on UN Security Council
Yes.
Resolution 242 and 338.
Right.
You have to fall back on Resolution 181. You have to fall back on the resolution passed in 2016 against
Yes.
illegal settlement. So therefore, yes, it is completely paralyzed now.
Yes.
The P5s are playing their own games,
Right.
but I'm not so sure that it is completely defunct and that we should not be getting into it. Let's put it that way.
Right, absolutely. It still matters. But Aditya, Foreign Minister Jaishankar made a very important point today about the fact that former Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru said that China first and not India. Is this politics ahead of the elections, or is this been the government stance all through?
For the BJP, this has been a consistent stand.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think we should look at it more from a political prism because of the Lok Sabha elections that are there.
Right.
Of course, the history is testimony to the fact, what happened in regard to Kashmir at the
Yes.
UN, who brought that out. We've debated that ad nauseum. But, apart from China also, there are several various issues. And there are technicalities. For instance, when UN was really formed,
Yes.
and these 5 countries actually became the P5, they themselves decided that they are going to rule or govern the UN mechanism.
Yes.
And today we are living in a very different time.
Yes.
Just like Jaishankar actually spoke yesterday in Rajkot with the Intellectual Forum, that today's times demand that there need to be reforms. In fact, with Ambassador Tirumurthy, we made a very brilliant documentary called Unmasked.
Yes.
That actually speaks about the reforms that are required, and also
Right.
how the UN has failed to counter terrorism.
Right.
That India has time and again, during Ambassador Tirumurthy's time, before that and after that, raised at the UN level how reforms, how countering terrorism, and how a consensus and new members in the P5 are absolutely required with the changing times.
Right, absolutely. New members are required, and it's only a matter of time before the P5 becomes, as Ambassador Tirumurthy said, the P9 possibly by the end of this decade, if not earlier. But Ambassador Tirumurthy, just run us through this thing of history, since history is the elephant in the room that keeps being invoked. The fact that India was offered the UN Security Council seat in the 50s by first the United States and then by the USSR, but we declined. We said pehle aap. It's not very clear on that. But is this was this just slogans? Was it rhetoric, or was there anything more to these invitations to join the UNSC, or just politics?
No, I think the touchstone I would think of, because I don't have too much of facts, I can only give you my opinion.
Right.
Now the thing is, the touchstone which you have is
Yes.
that how credible was the ability of these countries
Yes.
to get you the UN Security Council seat.
Right. Right.
Yes, maybe the United States and UK may have offered it, Russia may have offered it. The point is
Yes.
that they have been in a position to get you the Security Council seat.
Right.
So therefore, I think whatever the decision making was at that time, they probably decided that I think they would not be able to get the seat even if these countries had pushed it, or that the offers which we got were not credible enough.
Right.
I think that was the decision taken. It is very difficult for me to put myself into their shoes,
Yes.
or the Honorable Prime Minister of that time to decide.
Right.
And for example, I'll just give you an example which is more in a lighter vein.
Yes.
We have 4 countries out of 5 supporting us.
Yes.
Now, why haven't we taken it?
Right.
Because you know very well that there are other issues involved. And it is not just about China. It is about expansion in all categories, both the
Yes.
permanent category and the non-permanent category. So there is obviously a certain credibility factor here that we know we are not getting it now. Otherwise, 50 years later, someone will say that in 2024, we did not accept the Security Council seat. So I think we have to take this with a pinch of salt.
Right.
But I don't know the facts, but I can only guess that maybe the offer was not credible enough at that time for us to take it and
Yes.
make it meaningful.
Right, absolutely. The offer may not have been credible at that point for us to accept it, as Ambassador Tirumurthy just said. But thank you very much for joining us this evening, Ambassador Tirumurthy. For more on that story, on the expansion of the United Nations Security Council, you can watch our documentary, Unmasked.
Our country faced the horrors of terror long before the world took serious note of it. Over the decades, terrorism in different names and forms tried to hurt India.
During COVID, we had unrelenting cross-border terrorism from Pakistan.
ये तय करें कि ये चीजें हैं जिसे हम टेररिज्म कहते हैं.
Tell me one problem that the UN has solved.
Fighting terrorism is a central priority for the action of the United Nations.
The UN has a folk tongue. They speak with several tongues.
It was a murder that altered the trajectory of Indian politics. Former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated by a human bomb while campaigning for the Lok Sabha elections in May 1991. Now, just today, Murugan and Robert Pius, 2 Sri Lankan nationals who were part of the plot to kill Rajiv Gandhi, were sent back to Sri Lanka. They had completed their life sentences over 30 years. Now, these 2 were part of the LTTE, specifically its very secretive intelligence unit, TOSIS, or the Tiger Organization Security Intelligence Service. But there are many unanswered questions around Rajiv Gandhi's assassination over 30 years after that infamous act. And joining me to discuss this and the unanswered questions around the assassination are author Aniruddha Mitra and my colleague Geeta Datta. Aniruddha, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Sandeep. Thank you, Geeta.
Aniruddha, 35 years, 33 years after Rajiv Gandhi's assassination, what to your mind are the unanswered questions? You've researched that book for many years, but 3 decades later, what are the unanswered questions that you've still not found answers for? Indeed, our investigators haven't either.
I tried my best all these years to figure out how Murugan sourced the explosives, because going by the constituents of the explosives used in the human bomb, it was supposed to have been procured from some army sources, but I don't think anyone could really confirm it. The second most unanswered question for me would be, why is it that a section of the SIT, which I have mentioned in my book, were not allowed to look beyond the LTT? So there were enough evidence to suggest that Sivarasan was in touch with people from outside. His communication, which were tapped by the security agencies with one of their counterpart sitting in France, there are a lot of communications about payment to banks. Question is, what are those payments for? Some 50% was payment, then a balance 50% was supposed to be paid. So to me, these are some of the unanswered questions where I basically tried to find out after all these years, which is after exactly 3 decades, that was there anyone behind, I would say beyond the Tigers?
Absolutely. That's a big question there. And Geeta, that who authorized the Tigers? There's this conspiracy theory, of course, but it's been hinted at by the Jain Commission that there was actually someone behind the LTT. This was actually an outsourced hit, that the LTT was, just a pawn in the hands of a larger international conspiracy. Did you find anything about this when you were researching
Sandeep,
the
I
story?
have to reverse the roles here right now. I mean, you've studied this. You've been with this case for you've gone through it for 1 year.
Yes.
All I have, my association, was with my first job, where we actually went. It's funny, we are in the election year, general election years,
exactly.
and it's again that same
years.
time of the year. We are heading to May next month,
Right.
and this was the time, and how they did the dry run. They went for the VP Singh rally,
Yes.
and actually that's where our team was. We shot the whole thing.
Yes.
And when he was assassinated, Rajiv Gandhi, they said that they had done a dry run there. The SIT
On
had,
VP Singh?
the rally was there,
Yes.
and they, Dhanu had gone, and Shivrasan,
Former
the
Prime
one-eyed
Minister
Jack
VP
was
Singh.
what he
Yes,
was called.
yes.
And I remember being told that all the people, because those days we used to have the tapes were very small,
Yes.
so we only shoot 20 minutes.
Right.
So they went frame by frame to see where he was, because he
Yes.
was told that he was part of as a journalist,
Right.
in the enclosure. So then they found his picture and they released that still.
Yes.
And that was the first still anybody saw of Shivrasan, and this was before he died.
Of course.
Before in that encounter, which went on for 16.
Right.
But you've been with it for for 1 year. You've studied.
Yes,
I mean, what are
yes.
your main questions on the unanswered?
Well, unanswered is, unfortunately, the principal conspirators of this, which are Prabhakaran and Pottu Amman, his intelligence chief, they were never interrogated. They died, as you know, in 2009. They died fighting the Sri Lankan government. So they were the masterminds in the LTT of this entire operation, and we never kind of got to hear their side of the story, why they did it. Prabhakaran said just one line about in 2001. He said it was a very regrettable incident, whatever happened. He never acknowledged the LTT behind it. In fact, it was meant to be, as they call it in the world of among assassins. It was meant to be a clean hit.
Yeah.
No traces were to be left behind. And in fact, that camera that you mentioned, Hari Babu's camera, is where the entire gang of assassins was revealed, because Prabhakaran really wanted to make sure that this was, he wanted to revel in the last moments of Rajiv Gandhi and see him as he was being cold-bloodedly killed. And that was indeed the reason why the entire conspiracy was uncovered, as Aniruddha has also worked on. Aniruddha, now, there's a plan B to kill Rajiv Gandhi in Delhi in case plan A, that was in Sri Perumbudur, failed. So tell us about that plan B, and whether you made any attempts to trace that last surviving female suicide bomber who lived here in Delhi, not far from where Rajiv Gandhi lived.
Well, my active investigation into the case kind of ended after I left India Today and joined the television and film industry. But yes, I did work on Plan B. During my research, I read a lot from your stories in India Today. And after that, I made some inquiries with my friends in Delhi who are part of the SIT then, but now, they have all taken retirement. And I think it was a revelation to them also that this girl, her name was the curly hair girl, Sonia, right?
Yes, Sonia, Athirai alias Sonia. Yes.
Yeah. So the thing is, what I figured from some sources was that there was some kind of a differences between Sivarasan and Potuaman,
Yes.
where it is Potuaman who basically backed the plan B, and Sivarasan felt that was as if questioning his credibility. So he was very confident that he would be able to accomplish the task on the soil of Tamil Nadu, and there was no need for plan B. But however, Potuaman did go ahead and send Kanaka Sabapathy with this girl, and they did their Reiki, they did everything possible. And what I heard was that there was a point of time when this girl felt that, when she learned that, she might not be needed to execute, she felt somewhat sorry. She felt that I could have done something much greater, kind of sacrifice my life for my organization. It didn't happen for her. She was apparently so desperate that she at some point of time thought that if she is laden with explosive and she will jump onto a car in which Rajiv Gandhi will be traveling in the capital. These are all sensational information which I learned a bit definitely from your stories, and then later when I was working on my book.
Right.
But by then this girl was of course acquitted, and as far as I know she doesn't live in India anymore. She's married and Kanaka Sabapathy has passed away.
Yes.
Plan B was all in place, and I think that just goes to show how the organization worked. So
yes,
it was not just the ability of Sivarasan or Santan, because this duo was like a lethal combination, the way they were, starting from the assassination of the EPRF leader exactly a year ago from Rajiv Gandhi's killing. But Jaffna wanted to ensure that the job is done, and if that requires a plan B, so be it.
Yes, absolutely. Plan B, and some say even a plan C. And Geeta, the thing is, I worked on the story. It was a magazine story. Of course, Aniruddha has done a very exhaustively researched book, 90 days on it, which is being made into a web series now. But my conclusion was that once Prabhakaran gave the order to execute Rajiv Gandhi, there was literally nothing anyone could have done to prevent it. Because using, human bombs, it was unheard of at that time. Today, everyone's using it. All the ISIS and the Al-Qaedas of the world have perfected this suicide bombing techniques. But back in the day, 34 years back, it was practically unheard of. And that is what the Tigers plan to use, this surprise surgical strike on... and a woman.
And
exactly.
a woman assassin.
And he specified that it was to be a woman because he wanted to teach Rajiv Gandhi a lesson. But as I just told you, that there are probably answers that we will never know the answers. There are questions that we will never know the answers.
I have to ask you, the whole thing, the way it ended,
yes,
with Sivarasan, suicide,
yes,
and the two other who were with him.
Right.
That also, we were on the same organization. We also got that
yes.
live, the 16-hour thing. That also was a huge botched up.
Absolutely, it was.
Again, leaving a lot of unanswered questions.
It was botched up because they did this meticulous investigation. They traced this assassin team right outside the outskirts of Bengaluru. But by the time they landed up there, instead of storming the house, they kind of gave them a lot of time to kind of, prepare for the final stand, which was basically consuming the cyanide and killing themselves and destroying all the evidence. But that was just the attack team. And to my mind, since you asked, one of the biggest unanswered questions, Geeta and Anirudh, this question of the links between the ISI and the LTT. Now that is something that no one's really explored, because while the TOSIS, which is what Potuaman headed, this Tiger Organization Security, which was their intelligence wing, which backed the Black Tigers, which sent the Black Tigers, tasked them. While it was close to RNAW before the IPKF in 1987, post the IPKF operations of 1990, when obviously the LTT was a bad name. You couldn't do business with them. That's when the ISI kind of enters the stage. And the ISI began to cultivate very close links with Potuaman and Prabhakaran. If you remember, in 1993, there was the case of that massive explosive-laden ship, the Ahat, that ship was actually loaded in Karachi, and it was taking that entire shipload of explosives to Sri Lanka when it was intercepted by the Navy and the Coast Guard and the Marine Commandos.
Yes.
And the other interesting thing, Geeta, is that this ISI LTT link, I mean, Aniruddha, correct me if I'm wrong, it is quite possible that the 1993 bomb blasts, the RDX, could actually have been
Come from there.
offloaded from an LTT freighter, because they are the guys who kind of ruled the high seas because they had these freighters. You know, the ISI could send explosives to them. They could probably even authorize a hit. So these are, you know, some of the questions
And, again, when we were investigating the bomb blast, that's
Yes.
what we were told,
Yeah.
that there are the RDX that is there,
Yes.
which is landed because a large chunk went missing.
Yes.
They said it was, you know, it had gone to south, as well as the Veerappan, it had gone.
Yes,
and,
yes,
and
absolutely.
it went to Maoists who were operating, because that's how they were sending. But I just wanted to ask you, your series are about to come, is it going to be released soon. Are you going to be answering most of the questions, or are you leaving it open-ended also?
Not the ISI link, of course. And I have tried my best to answer that probably when exactly this Prabhakaran's whole attitude towards Rajiv Gandhi is something personal. That when he exactly started, when he came to Delhi to meet Rajiv Gandhi, and he was kept at the Ashoka Hotel, he went to meet Rajiv Gandhi, and he still wanted to carry his cyanide capsule, which the SPG objected. From that to his talk with Anton Balasingham over the phone was tapped, where he had said that I think they are going to put me under a house arrest, but if they leave me, they will make the biggest mistake of their life, because I will have taught this guy a lesson. These are all on government record. This was used in the charge sheet later on.
Yes.
So the question I raised in my book was that, if we had this kind of information much in advance, if we had the reports filed by B. Raman, the then head of RAW in Chennai, about the threat perceptibility from the LTT on Rajiv Gandhi will be at its highest when he is not in power.
Yes.
How come nobody really bothered?
Absolutely.
Rather,
Aniruddha, I'm afraid we're completely out of time here, but thanks very much for joining us this evening. You want to read more about Rajiv Gandhi's assassination and how the conspiracy was hatched? Read Aniruddha's book, 90 Days, soon to be a web series on OTT. A high-level committee headed by former President Ramnath Kovind has recommended simultaneous elections in India. This is a long-standing demand for one nation, one elections. It's been driven by the BJP. How is the government planning to go about it? And joining me to discuss this is Mohammad Amin, former Joint Director in the Election Commission, and my colleague Ashok Bagadia. Mr. Amin, one nation, one election, long-standing demand of the BJP, of the government of India as well. How does the government plan to go about it? Will it be a parliamentary majority, a two-thirds majority rather, that would be needed to pass all the amendments to the Indian Constitution?
The history shows that this was recommended by the law committee, was the committee in 1999.
Yes.
And the Personal and Public Grievance Committee has recommended, and the Law Justice also 2015, the draft would they have issued. And the Law Commission has also draft submitted 2018 for the Parliament amendment of the RP Act 195 bracket 2B.
Right.
So will be amended in the Parliament. So I think BJP has constituted a committee, high-level power committee, to reduce the expenditure of the country's taxpayers. That's why they were in their mind. That's why they headed by the Mr. Ramnath Kovind, and the members were there, Home Minister, the committee, high-level committee, and Ghulam Nabi Azad, senior parliamentarian, and the ex-parliamentary minister also. He has a long experience for his life. And Mr. N.K. Singh, he was the Finance Secretary and Expenditure, and Subhash Kashyap, he was also Secretary General in the Lok Sabha.
Right.
So really, they have a very high power committee, and they have their long experiences in this business. So that's why they have submitted to the President of India. As they were thinking that the last election was for Lok Sabha only,
Yes.
we have expenditure was occurred approximately 4,000 crore rupees.
Yes.
So this will be cut down simultaneously. We are going for the elections of the Parliament and the Lok Sabha or Parliament Lok Sabha and Assembly elections. So they want to think about that. They want to cut it down. So taxpayers' money.
Right,
and
absolutely.
It will be a benefit to the country also and benefit to the government also. This money will be used for the country's development.
Right, that's it. I'm just going to ask Ashok this. Ashok, is that the biggest argument that's in favor of one nation, one election? The saving that the government says will be accrued because of holding simultaneous elections in state and center?
Well, that seems to be the principal argument.
Yes.
That if we go in for simultaneous elections, there will be a lot of expenditure which will be saved, a lot of public time which will be saved. And number three, they are saying what really happens is that the nation is constantly in a phase of election, and there is a degree of policy paralysis also which sets in once the elections are announced. So to overcome all these situations, what is being recommended by the COVID committee is that let's have a simultaneous elections.
Right.
And simultaneous elections, and the rationale behind it definitely is expenditure. The second thing is policy paralysis which sets in, that can be overcome. And people, the politicians, the legislators are more dedicated to the work of governance rather than preparing for elections. So this seems to be the rationale. But if you look at it historically, this won't be for the first time that India would be experimenting with this simultaneous elections. When we began in 1947, the first elections that were held in 1951,
held parallel,
the parliamentary and assembly elections were held parallelly. But what happened was, then again, that whole idea of simultaneous election hits a roadblock.
Yes, where you have the great disruption of the late 1960s, where the state assemblies were...
It hits a roadblock, emergencies are imposed, governments fall because of no confidence motions. And those situations, to meet those situations, elections had to be held. And this whole cycle of simultaneous election was broken. But now, once again, 70 years later, an attempt is being made that let's conduct simultaneous elections.
Absolutely. But Ashok, it's really important to get a consensus. There are two ways of doing it. One is, of course, the two-thirds majority way, where the BJP is, of course, pushing for it. It gets a two-thirds majority on its own with its allies, and it pushes these amendments through. And the other way is, of course, you build if you don't have the two-thirds majority, you need to get the consensus with the other political parties on board as well. Do you see a possibility of the latter happening, and how closely is this linked to the electoral results of 2024?
Well, as far as simultaneous elections are concerned, you have to understand that there are various stakeholders who are involved in this process of elections. So one is the people of the country. The second are the politicians. The third are the political parties. The fourth is the Election Commission of India. And the fifth is the state government. So all these are stakeholders who play a very important role in the manner whether the elections are conducted simultaneously or separately. So there has to be coming together of these various stakeholders to push this scheme through. Now, as far as introducing the law is concerned, the government can introduce the law, get it passed in the parliament once they have the numbers. That's not an issue. But how it plays on the ground, it depends on the will of the politician, the political parties, whether they are on the same page with the government or not. So what is happening is that there is already a consensus building exercise which is taking place. Consultation is taking place with various political parties, because until and unless those political parties are on board, you cannot implement this scheme.
You mean all political parties need to have a...
Yeah, all political parties have to be on board, but that doesn't necessarily mean that each and every political party agrees with the idea. But largely, broadly, a consensus has to emerge. And once the consensus emerges, the law is in place, then everything else falls in place.
Absolutely. And Mr. Amin, how important is this, getting the consensus of all the political parties, or rather a majority of them, before this law is actually passed? And it's very clear that this seems to be the roadmap for 2029 and obviously not 2024, but going ahead in the next 5 years, the government has indicated this is going to be their priority area. But How important is that consensus among the political parties?
In case of opposition parties, leaders also affected. Like nowadays, you can see in the Himachal government,
Yeah.
Himachal government, Karnataka government, and the West Bengal government. Other governments was also in the same boat. Actually, model code of conduct when we impose, so we can see the 50 and 60 days are wasted for that.
Yes.
All projects were stopped, schemes were stopped, and the development was also stopped for the election. And everybody is busy for the election, and they can very well they can understand what the fact behind it. In case of the election, simultaneously, you can find the only last we have seen the at the time of the old ages. At that time, we have the ballot boxes. Only one polling station, two ballot boxes.
Right.
So one for the member of parliament, one for the assembly.
Yes.
And same here you can find the polling station is same. So expenditure is also same. Expenditure also cut. And staff is also same. Only EVMs and VVPAT machines are double. One for the
Right.
parliament members
Yes.
and one for the assembly. So time will be also the same.
Yes.
So it will be benefited to the government, countrymen and the parties also.
Of course.
If they can understand very well.
Right, absolutely. But Ashok, there's also that flip side which says that there's one very significant group of former election commissioners who argue that it's actually a good thing for the government to be in constant election mode because they're on their toes and therefore more accountable to the people rather than this thing of, going to sleep 5 years, uninterrupted, untrammeled power for the hands of the government. And that's the way the US also operates, right? Every 2 years, the US goes into election mode. How valid is that argument?
See, when you look at the scheme of simultaneous elections, we can't say that this particular scheme is 100% foolproof.
Right.
Okay. It'll have its pros, it'll have its cons. Now, I have read various former election commissioners, chief election commissioners, who have raised a red flag to this idea of simultaneous elections. Yes. And they believe that, look, if this, if you look at the other side of the story, that constantly the politicians are preparing themselves to go to seek the mandate of the people, right, which makes them constantly to be on their toes.
Yes.
If there are elections which are happening every now and then, the politician is constantly on his or her toes,
yeah,
trying to implement the welfare schemes or any other schemes, yes, which benefit the people.
Right.
That is one side of the story. The other side of the story is that, look, let's have a simultaneous elections, both for the parliament and the assembly. What we do is we save money. This whole idea of the state, the government, everything in the sense that all the development works coming to a standstill, right, because either the politicians are gearing up for elections or the model code of conduct is kicking in, right, and things like that. So let's have 5 years of uninterrupted administration,
right,
and policy making. Let this work not be disturbed, right, by any other thing. Right. So that seems to be the idea. But however, this whole process of simultaneous elections will also have its share of teething troubles because, you know, we have to be alive to the political realities. You cannot, you can come up with the idea of a simultaneous elections, but what if tomorrow in some particular assembly or in the parliament there is a no confidence motion, and the government falls?
Right.
What do? You have to conduct the elections.
Yes, you have to.
So what has been suggested by the Kovind committee is that suppose you have an assembly election or a parliament election and the government falls in 2 years' time.
Right.
So an election will have to be conducted to elect a new parliament.
But for the remaining
But
term of
only
3
for
years.
the remaining 3 years time period.
Right.
And it won't be for the 5-year term.
Right.
But let's see how it plays out. But that is a suggestion which has come in. And it will be very interesting to see how the government wants to implement it.
Right. It will be very interesting to see how the government would want to implement it. But that's the big story of this year. One nation, one election is a radical suggestion, and it comes from none other than a high-level committee headed by former President Ramnath Kovind. And that seems to be the BJP and indeed the government's plan for the 2029 Lok Sabha elections. But I want to thank Mr. Amin and my colleague Ashok Bagaria for joining us this evening. You can watch an excerpt from our story, The BJP's Mission 2029, to know more about the story, why it's such a priority for the government. Download our app and watch.
पार्टी का कार्यकर्ता चुनावी समय पे ही काम नहीं करता, वो पूरे साल उस प्रक्रिया में रहता है, उसको इतनी समझ हो जाती है कि मुझे पार्टी की क्या गतिविधियां और पार्टी को कैसे काम में लेना है और कैसे बूथ को संभालना है.
See, BJP is a party which is cadre-based party, and in any cadre-based party, the discipline is very robust. The line of command and the follow-up, there is a chain of command. So the communication skills are very good of the people, but more than that, I think the flow of information, it flows from top to the down, and the reporting is perfect. That is what is unique about BJP if we compare it with other political parties.
पार्टी कार्यकर्ताओं की मेहनत, उनका पसीना और उनका बूथ पर काम करने की वजह से आज ये पार्टी यहाँ तक पहुँची है. और पार्टी में मुझे लगता है कि हर कार्यकर्ता को उतना सम्मान मिलता है.
The secret is basically our ideology, which people are liking more, that nation first. Not for family, not for personal gains. We are not here to be somebody or to reach at some post. We are here to do something for the nation. That is the basic difference between other parties and BJP. So ideology is very important.
No party is invincible, nobody is invincible. But yes, this is the time when BJP has a very strong support base. If you compare the support base of BJP with other political parties, there is a huge difference. So 2024 seems like BJP emerging as a very strong party. Any other party would find it very difficult to defeat BJP.
The game of power politics has begun. The poll bugle has been sounded. Who will receive the death blow? Who will be checkmated? It still remains to be seen.
Streaming on News9 Plus, news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.